everyone, welcome back to our podcast, Mind and Morals. I'm your host, Kashima Siddiqui, and in today's episode, we are going to conquer a mind boggling topic, John Rawls' theory of justice. I have my intellectually talented panel here to discuss the topic with me today. We have Rakim, Afnan, Wafi, Sian, and Zarif. I'm really looking forward to make this episode spicy. So, to begin with, I'm going to notify that we are going to conduct our episode today in three different segments. We're going to start with a thought provoking experiment inspired by the concept of veil of ignorance introduced by John Rawls, following up with a thorough discussion on John Rawls' theory of justice and different parts of it, and finally, ending our discussion with a couple of case studies. Whew, that's a lot. Now let us begin by introducing our panel. So, respective members, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Hello everyone, I am Zarif Yamin and thanks for having me.
Hello guys, I'm Afnan Firdaus. I truly appreciate the invitation and I'm honored to join.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me Kashima. I'm really glad to be here.
Hi there everyone, I'm Rakantastum Choudhury. Thanks for having me here.
Alright, before we get into today's discussion, let's take a moment to understand the philosopher behind the theory, John Rawls. Rawls was an American political philosopher who changed the way we think about justice in the 20th century. His most famous work, The Theory of Justice, published in 1971, revived moral and political philosophy by asking a powerful question: what kind of society would we choose if we didn't know our place in it? Instead of focusing on wealth or power, Rawls argued that a just society must be built on fairness, especially for those who are least advantaged. His concept of justice as fairness challenged utilitarianism and became a foundation for debates on democracy, equality, and human rights. Rawls used truths like the original position and the veil of ignorance to imagine how fair rules could be chosen without bias. So today, through this lens, we are going to explore his ideas, break them down with our panel, and apply them to real-life situations from mega projects in Bangladesh to education and inequality around the world. Alright, so let's hear from our panel member Zarif.
The liberty principle says that every person should have the same basic rights and the freedoms, like freedom of speech, religion, voting, and safety under the law. These rights are not based on wealth, class, or background. These belong to all people just because they are human. In fair society, no one should have fewer rights than others.
So, do you think that too much liberty can create injustice?
Yes. When liberty is not balanced with fairness, it can lead to problems. For example, if people use their freedom of speech to spread hate or false information, it can hurt others. Also, if some people are very rich or powerful, they might use their freedom to make more than their fair share, like avoiding taxes or controlling resources. That creates injustice, especially for the poor or less powerful. This is why Rawls believed that freedom must be shared equally and any extra power or wealth must be used to help the least advantaged people. Too much liberty for a few can lead to unfair treatment for many. So that's the thing.
Alright, so we heard from Mr. Zarif about the liberty principle, but we also know that the liberty principle has another part to it, which is equality versus equity. Now I would like to ask Mr. Afnan to share his views about it.
Equality means giving everyone the same resources, opportunities, or treatment, assuming that everyone starts from the same position. Equity, on the other hand, acknowledges that people have different circumstances, barriers, and needs, and allocates resources or support accordingly so that everyone has a fair chance to succeed. So, taking for example, imagine three people of different heights trying to look over a fence. Equality gives all three the same sizes of blocks to stand on. On the other hand, equity gives shorter individuals taller boxes so that everyone can see over the fence equally. This concept is vital in policy making because societies have historical and social inequalities, and a purely equal distribution often preserves existing disadvantages. Equity attempts to correct those imbalances.
Thank you for sharing your valuable opinion. I do like your ideas about equality and equity, but do you think that they are the same? Alright. So, do you think that can policies aimed at equity be seen as unfair by those who are being given more?
Yes, policies aimed at equity can often feel unfair to those who are tasked to give up resources, privileges, or opportunities they believe they have earned through merit or personal effort. This perception of unfairness typically arises when people don't see or acknowledge the systemic disadvantages others have faced. For example, job quotas or affirmation action policies might seem like an unequal distribution to some, but they aim to balance deep rooted historical and social inequalities. Rawls' theory of justice addresses this tension through difference principle, arguing that inequalities are only justifiable if they benefit the least advantaged in society, essentially prioritizing fairness over formal equality.
Can you provide some examples where equity corrected long-standing injustice?
One example is Bangladesh's original quota system from 1971, which helped the families of freedom fighters get jobs and education. It was meant to support them because they sacrificed so much for this country. Another case is the quotas for indigenous people in Chattogram hill tracts, so they could get better chances in schools and government jobs after being years of left behind. Around the world, a good example is South Africa's Black Economic Empowerment Program, which tried to give business opportunities to Black South Africans after the apartheid. Even after during the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries gave vaccines first to poor and at-risk communities because they were in more danger. These actions tried to make things fairer by helping those who needed it the most.
So we heard some great insights from Mr. Afna. That was two different parts of liberty principle, which followed with equality versus equity. Now we are going to move into another principle introduced by John Rawls, which is the difference principle. And I would like to ask Ms. Rakin to speak about it.
The difference principle is one of the two key parts of John Rawls' theory of justice. In this principle, he states that inequality is allowed only if it benefits the poorest or least advantaged people in society. Rawls did not believe in strict equality, everyone getting the same. Rather, he believed in fair inequality. So if the rich help create jobs, pay taxes that support healthcare or education, then their success is acceptable under the difference principle.
Alright, so by now we all know that John Rawls not only discussed the difference principle and liberty principle, but he also criticized utilitarianism in his theory. So I would like to ask Mr. Wafi, what do you think about it?
Well, John Rawls' theory of justice is important, but it also has some problems. First, some people say it's too idealistic. Rawls uses an idea called the original position, where people choose rules for society without knowing anything about themselves. But in real life, people do know their background and often act to protect their interests. So this idea doesn't match how the real world works. Second, Rawls doesn't talk much about past injustices. Many countries have deep problems from things like colonialism, racism, and inequality. Just giving everyone equal rights today doesn't fix what happened in the past. Another problem is that Rawls focuses mainly on fair distribution of money and resources, but justice is also about things like respect, culture, identity, which his theory doesn't fully explain. Lastly, his theory is based on Western ideas about individuals making choices, but in many cultures, people think more about the community and not just about themselves as individuals. So, while Rawls' theory helps us think about fairness, it doesn't cover everything. It needs to be more realistic and include different cultures and histories.
Alright, I do like your ideas, but do you agree that sacrificing a few for the majority's benefit is morally wrong?
No, I don't fully agree. In some cases, sacrificing a few for the greater good can be justified, especially if it prevents harm to many or saves lives. It depends on the situation.
So do you think that Rawls' theory work in emergencies like during pandemics?
No, Rawls' theory doesn't work well in emergencies like pandemics because it's too focused on long-term fairness, not quick decisions. In crises, we often need to act fast and prioritize saving the most lives, even if it creates temporary inequality.
So up until now we were discussing the liberty principle and the parts of it, as in equality versus equity, introduced by John Rawls. Now we are going to move forward to another idea introduced by him, which is the difference principle. Now I would like to ask Ms. Rakim to share her insights about it.
Thank you, Kashima. The difference principle is one of the two key parts of John Rawls' theory of justice. In this principle, he said that inequality is allowed only if it benefits the poorest or least advantaged people in society. Rawls did not believe in strict equality, rather, he believed in fair inequality. So, if rich people help create jobs, pay taxes that support healthcare or education, then their success is acceptable under the difference principle.
So I have a question for you. How does Rawls' difference principle compare to utilitarianism in terms of justice and inequality, do you think?
Rawls' difference principle says inequality is only fair if it helps the least advantaged in society. The focus is on fairness and ensuring the poor are better off. In contrast, utilitarianism aims to maximize overall happiness, even if that means some inequality or harm to the people, as long as the total well-being of society is increased. In short, Rawls prioritizes the poor, while utilitarianism focuses on total happiness.
So how do we know if difference principle is working in a society?
Well, we can see if the poorest people are truly benefiting by looking at things like income levels, access to education and healthcare, job opportunities, and overall living condition. If these things are improving for the least advantaged, then the principle is working.
So now let's hear from our guest Sian about the impact and influence of Rawls.
Thank you, Kashima, for the question. Rawls brought new life to the political philosophy. Before him, many people saw it as dry or outdated. But with this idea of justice as fairness, he made people think deeply about that, what a fair society should look like. His biggest idea, the veil of ignorance, became a powerful tool. It asked us to imagine making the rules without knowing our place in the society. This changed people discusses about law, rights, and fairness. Rawls' ideas have influenced public policy in real ways. For example, we can say in education, in healthcare, leaders asked, are we giving everyone a fair chance, especially the disadvantaged? His work helped support ideas like equal opportunity and even affirmative actions. He also influenced global ethics. Rawls believed rich countries should help poor ones, not out of kindness, but because justice demands it. His thinking has shaped human rights like discussions, especially the United Nations. Even today, courts, governments, and the university still use these ideas. As students, we can use the veil of ignorance to ask, is this fair for everyone, not just me? In short, Rawls didn't just write theories, he helped people act more fairly from classrooms to courtrooms and also to the countries.
All right. So now I want to move on to our second segment, which is a thought experiment introduced by John Rawls, which is called the veil of ignorance. I would like one of you guys to explain. Could you tell me what it is about?
Okay, let me explain this. The veil of ignorance is a way of thinking about fairness and justice. Rawls asks us to imagine that we are designing a new society. But here's a twist. We don't know who will be in the society. We don't know our gender, religion, race, how rich or poor we will be, how smart we are, or even our health status. And this not knowing is what Rawls calls the veil of ignorance. If we truly didn't know where we would end up, we would want to create a fair rules that work not for the powerful, but also for everyone and the least advantaged. After all, we could end up in their shoes.
Well, let me add something. Let's clear up a common confusion. The original position and the veil of ignorance aren't the same thing, though they go hand in hand. The original position is the big thought experiment Rawls created. It's like a virtual room where people come together to decide the rules of society. The veil of ignorance is what you wear inside that room. It blocks all knowledge of your personal identity, your class, race, gender, or talents, so that your decisions are fair and unbiased. In short, the original position is where you decide. The veil of ignorance is how you decide fairly without knowing who you will be.
So, now that we know what veil of ignorance is, in the same context, I would like to ask you guys an open question. If you had no idea whether you'd be born rich or poor, what kind of society would you design?
Okay, Kashima. So what I think is, if you had no idea whether you would be born in a rich or a poor family, what kind of society would you design? I would design a society that guarantees basic rights for everyone like education, healthcare, and freedom. Regardless of the background, I would want a system where the poorest will still alive and have a decent life. Because there's a chance that I would be one of them. I would focus more on fairness and privilege.
That sounds noble, but would you still support the same policies you do now if you didn't know your gender, religion, or class?
If you are talking about supporting the same policies we do now, regardless of our gender, religion, or class, probably not. If I couldn't count on being from a dominant group, I'd be more critical of policies that benefit only the majority or elite. I would support laws that protect minorities and ensure equal access to opportunities. Justice has to work even if I'm not in the position of power.
So, with that, our second segment is over. And now we are moving forward to our third segment, which is a case study. Now, let's now turn our attention to one of the most powerful resistance movements of recent times, the 2021 and 2022 farmers' protest in India. In response to three new agricultural laws passed by the Indian government, millions of farmers, especially from rural states like Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh, took to the streets. The laws were framed as progressive reforms meant to liberalize the agricultural market. But for small and marginal farmers, they represented a threat, a loss of guaranteed pricing, increased corporate control, and deeper economic insecurity. At the heart of the protest was a question that Rawls would have taken seriously: who truly benefits from development, and at what cost? These laws were passed with minimal consultation, ignoring the voices of those most affected. From a Rawlsian perspective, thinking behind the veil of ignorance, we must ask, would lawmakers have supported these reforms if they didn't know whether they'd be born in a wealthy industrial or vulnerable landless farmer? This case gives us a powerful opportunity to examine justice as fairness in the real world. Do the reforms lift up the least advantage as Rawls' difference principle demands, or do they reinforce inequality in the name of efficiency? Mr. Wafi, what do you have to say about that?
Well, Rawls argues that just laws are those that would be chosen by rational individuals behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing their place in society. If policymakers had operated from this standpoint, they would have considered the risks and vulnerabilities of marginal and small farmers, not just the interests of corporations or large landowners. Now, from an ethical standpoint, the lack of consultation with farming communities suggests that these laws were not shaped from an impartial, inclusive perspective. Behind the veil of ignorance, rational actors would likely demand strong protections like minimum support price and regulatory safeguards to prevent exploitation.
Okay, I would add from the perspective of the liberty principle. Rawls' liberty principle ensures equal basic freedoms for all, including the right to political participation and protest. In the case of India's farm laws, the lack of consultation with farmers and restrictions on protests such as internet shutdowns and arrests limited these essential liberties. From behind a veil of ignorance, rational actors would demand protection of such freedoms, knowing they could be in a vulnerable position themselves. The way these laws were implemented and dissent managed falls short of Rawls' standard and safeguarding basic liberties.
In Rawls' theory, he emphasizes equity, fair access to opportunities and protections, not just formal equality. While the laws applied equally on paper, in practice they overlooked structural disadvantages the small farmers face by treating all farmers as if they start from the same position. The reforms favored those already advantaged, undermining Rawlsian fairness.
I'd like to talk about this case from the perspective of difference principle. This principle allows social and economic inequalities only if they benefit the least advantaged. The farm laws, by favoring deregulation and opening markets to large private players, may have had potential economic benefits, but those benefits were not structured to directly uplift small and marginal farmers who feared income loss. Reforms appear to violate the difference principle as they risk exacerbating inequality rather than mitigating it.
So, from Rawls' ethical framework, Indian farms' laws fall short of being just. They neither emerged from a veil of ignorance, perspective, nor prioritize the least well off through the difference principle. Though aiming for the modernization and efficiency, the lack of equability, design, participatory democracy points to a deeper issue. Development that increases inequality is not just, even if it raises our GDP.
Alright, thank you for your valuable insights, everyone. And with that, we've come to the end of our episode today. Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Stay tuned for our next episode of Mind and Morals. Goodbye.